here we are with Diego Benavent and Diederik, who are going to present something that is very special. They are working on a systematic review for the outcome measures library. You will know what it means, and we are ready to listen to you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Loreto, and thank you everyone for being there. Thank you everyone in InMusc. So as Loreto mentioned, we are going to talk to you about social support in rheumatic and musculoskeletal disease and the work we've been doing related to it. In the social jungle of human existence, the people we have around influence how we feel and behave in an incredible manner. And despite these influences might sometimes be a challenge, I think that in that uniqueness lies some of the best flavor in life. So what I'm referring here is to social networks. So what is a social network? Well, most people think of a social network is some very trendy use of internet-based social media sites to stay connected. But as you all know here in InMusc, a social network is something else. A social network is a social structure made up of a set of social actors, such as individuals or organizations, set of dyadic ties, and other social interaction between these actors. So please let me introduce you with an example to represent what a social network might be. And for this intent, let me talk to you about Anna. Anna is a 27-year-old very kind woman. 7 years ago, she was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and since then, she has been on methotrexate and intermittent cycles of steroids. And during this year, she has been most of the times on what doctors call remission of the disease. But despite being quite controlled, she has been having a hard time and having a lot of doubts and uncertainties if she will be able to cope with the disease. And her social network had been crucial in the management of rheumatoid arthritis. The people that you're seeing in the picture were really important so that Anna could keep his work while in having pain, don't fall into depression, and take her medication and cope with the situation. So please let me introduce you to these people I'm talking about. Here on the upper left corner, we have her mother, Carmen. Carmen has been always really supportive with Anna. She always has some expression of confidence and encouragement to give Anna. Her favorite sentence actually is, "Because I believe so much in you, I know you will be able to cope with this situation." Then we have, at the upper right corner, we have her father, Carlos. Carlos might not be so good on the emotional side, but he was also crucial so that Anna always took the right decisions when she was struggling with the disease. He looked for relevant information on the disease and its management and could give relevant advice to Anna so that she could take informed decisions. Then, lower left corner, we have her boyfriend, Pedro. Pedro is a caring and trustworthy boyfriend who listens and empathizes with Anna since her diagnosis. His hugs are like a medicine to Anna. And then we have Anna's best friend, Maria. Maria has been helping Anna a lot by accompanying her to her consultation, taking her to her job when she couldn't drive, and even taking some of her responsibilities when she couldn't manage to do it. So here we can see four different persons, four different very important persons for Anna, and we can see how the social network represent four dimensions of social support. These are esteem support, represented by her mother, and esteem support refers to encouragements and provides information that is useful for evaluation. This way, her mother reminded her of the qualities that equip her to fight against RA. Then we have her father representing informational support, and informational support relates to advice, suggestions, and information. For example, her father provided facts and guidance during treatment. Then we have the representation of emotional support, which is basically the expressions of empathy, love, trust, and caring. Her boyfriend provided hope and a listening ear at any time. And then we have a structural support. A structural support refers basically to all the tangible aids that is provided for a patient. As it can be observed, the construct of social support is quite complex and multidimensional, and it entangles several aspects that are related to social networks, integrations, and social statements. So how this social support will affect rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases? Well, I don't want to do a spoiler of Diederik part, but just to introduce a little bit the topic, I will show you some samples of articles of social support that show that is really relevant and important in rheumatic disease. And how this can be? Well, social support leads to less pain and disability, also leads to better quality of life, and may also lead to less mental health problems. And this is really interesting, and sometimes not it doesn't have the impact that I think it should deserve in a lot of medical congresses. And one of the reasons is maybe because how the studies need to be done. For example, let's take one of these examples. In this study, they conclude that the assumption was confirmed that social support has a major effect on psychosocial well-being. The problem I see here is how they do have to do the study. The patients were gathered by means of a 2-hour interview at the patient homes. And as you can imagine, this is quite time consuming and quite difficult to replicate. So at this point, we wonder, so how can we measure social support? And one of the many things I learned while I was 1 year ago doing a placement in InMusc with you is that to measure, we need instruments. And therefore, the question arises, what is an instrument? An instrument is any measurement, questionnaire, or technique that provides a quantifiable results and represents a construct. Remember that an instrument might be considered a patient-reported outcome when it has included the opinion of the patients in its development. So then we will need to assess how valid and how good is an instrument. And for this, we have the psychometric properties that I will just summarize them here, mainly the validity, that is the degree to which an instrument measures the construct that is supposed to measure. Then we also have the reliability, which is the degree to which the measurement is free from measurement error. We have the sensitivity to change, which is the ability of an instrument to detect change over time in the construct to be measured. And also we have the feasibility related to the viability of the instrument to be conducted in a clinical setting, for example, referring to time, cost, or burden of the instrument. So the two main psychometric properties that I will say that are probably validity and reliability can be related in different ways. For taking an example, in these figures, you can see the possible relation between them. And the first target, upper left, did not present reliability nor validity because they hit the spread points only on the superior part of the target, as opposed to the target of the lower right of the corner, that it's reliable and valid because the shots hit the place where they were supposed to and are consistent right in the set of the target. So now that we've introduced this, we can start talking about our work or review. What did we do? We aim to systematically review and summarize the psychometric properties of social support instruments developed or validated in rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases. And to do this, we developed a systematic review, a search with the help of Lewis, an expert librarian. We developed a search in Medline, Embase, PsycInfo, Signal, and Epistemonicos from its session to June 2020. And then Diederik and me independently screen articles on title plus abstracts, almost 5,000 articles, as Diederik will show you later, and nest on full tests. Articles were included if covering psychometric properties on social support instrument uses in rheumatic diseases. And they were included in Rayyan, a platform that really facilitates us this work. Studies on questionnaires, lacking an English version, and published materials, case reports, letters for review were excluded. And then risk of bias of studies and instruments were assessed via the COSMIN checklist. So I'm sure most of you already know the COSMIN checklist, but just in case someone of you is not familiar with it, I introduce you to this wonderful adventure that is the COSMIN adventure, a COSMIN methodology for developing systematic reviews of patient-reported outcomes. As you see, the summary of it is already quite intense with almost 80 pages that we have to go through. Basically, the most relevant information that is included there, I would say that is the COSMIN taxonomy. It's basically what we talk about on the patient-reported outcomes refer to the different psychometric properties, but really with a really good presentation and hierarchy. So, for example, let's examine a little bit further in the validity, for example. Remember that this is the that the instrument measures what it is supposed to. It has different properties such as the content validity, that is the degree to which the content of an instrument is an adequate reflection of the construct to be measured, and it's normally assessed by talking with doctors or with developers or with patients. Then we have the construct validity, which has different parts, and is basically the degree to which the score of an instrument are consistent with hypotheses based on the assumption that the instrument validly measures the construct to be measured. And it has different parts, such as the structural validity, which is normally assessed by factor analysis, or you have hypothesis testing that is assessed by relationships among instruments. And then we have criterion validity, which is the degree to which scores of an instrument are an adequate reflection of the gold standard, just in case there is a gold standard. Then we move on to reliability. That is, remember, the degree to which the measurement is free from measurement error. And it also has different parts. One of the most important is internal consistency, referring to the degree of interrelatedness among the different items. It also has the reliability, which is the proportion of the total variance in the measurement, which is because of the true difference among patients. And it can be a test retest reliability or inter-rater reliability, and it's normally assessed by the ICC or the kappa. And then we have the measurement error, which is the systematic and random error of a patient that is not attributed to true changes in the construct. Then the last psychometric property is responsiveness, also called sensitivity to change. It represents the ability of an instrument to detect change over time in the construct to be measured, and is normally measured by the standardized response mean. So these are the psychometric properties in the COSMIN methodology, and they were assessed, all of them, by following these boxes of the COSMIN risk of bias checklist. Obviously, not all the articles we assessed had all of the psychometric properties, but whenever they report the psychometric properties, we had to assess it by using the determinate box. For example, let's go to one of the boxes that I find probably the most intuitive one and the most straightforward, which is the box of internal consistency. I refer is probably the easiest one because it only has 5 questions, whereas other properties such as the prompt development had 35 questions, or the content validity has 31 questions. So here, there is a very important principle that is the worst score counts, meaning that if there is any property that, any question that is rated, for example, inadequate, the whole property will be rated inadequate, no matter if the rest are very good. And also, for example, as you see, there are sometimes that there are some questions that are not applicable. For example, here, question 4 is only for IRT score, item response theory based score, sorry. So as you see, our duty was to check if there was the psychometric property in the article, and then do the risk of bias by responding to this question. First question, was an internal consistency statistic calculated for each dimensional scale or subscale separately? If it was very good. If it not was at all, it was inadequate, and therefore the whole property will be rated inadequate. So what do we got from here? Well, Diederik will explain to you much better the results that we got, but basically what we did was extract the information of every article to extract the psychometric property of every instrument, and then we separately wrote them in an Excel. And then in a different tab of the Excel, we rated the risk of bias of the instrument. For every psychometric property I was assessing the article, we had to go through the box of the COSMIN risk of bias checklist. For example, in an instrument that has internal consistency, and as you see the box before, we only have 5 questions because there are only 5 questions, and maybe some of them were not applicable. And for example, in this instrument, for example, there was not cross-cultural validation or neither measurement error or criterion validity. That's why these questions are not answered. But I think I'm already getting too much into the results, and that's the other part. So I think I'm about to let him the word. So just a final forward. If I had been told what this SLR adventure implied, I would have imagined that the experience would have been really hard, and I would have struggled during a very, very tough process. However, I have to admit that my experience has been incredibly good. And the reason for this, I have it clear. I have had an incredible social support. First, from Diederik, who has some incredible abilities of providing STEAM support. He had always have a word to convince me that we were moving forward, even when I had lost hope. Then also an incredible support from Loreto and Sofia, who have given us amazing informational and structural support throughout the whole process. To all of them, I have to say thank you. And I have to also extend this gratitude, of course, to all of you in InMusc, because the support you gave me during my placement last year, I think has been the best social support I could imagine. And I'm sure it will impact me during my whole life and my whole career. So for all this, thank you. And thank you for counting on me to also be in these meetings. So thank you. And I left Diederik tell you about the interesting part, the results.
Great, Diego. Thank you. Does everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. I'm now sharing my PowerPoint, and I'm hoping that it will go full screen. Does everyone see my full screen?
Yes.
Excellent. So I first want to say good morning from Leuven, Belgium. I want to show you the results of this magnificent search. But first, I also want to say that Diego really underlined the importance of a social support network when doing such research, because of Diego that I could keep positive. Of course, what are the results now? You see that in total, we ended up with around 5,000 articles, and that all the different resources like Embase and Medline PubMed gave a few hits in total with over 5,500 hits, and then around 1,000 were duplicates. I think it actually shows how important it is to search in different databases to make sure that you have all the possible results you can have. So never restrict yourself to only one database. But okay, now we have 5,000 hits. What do we do with them? And I totally recommend for everyone using Rayyan. Rayyan is a free tool, a free website online where you can actually load all your paper articles into, and you can share it with other researchers. And then you get into this screen, and this screen gives you actually an overview of how you are progressing through your review, and actually also how your collaborators are going through your review. It's actually a bit of a nasty tool also in the sense that it's really competitive, because you see the progress of your co-researcher, your co-worker, and you of course also want to have the same progress. And I also think it's quite important because it can be quite laborious, because for example, you see that Diego has worked, I think, over 600 minutes on reviewing all these article titles. And it just shows you how huge the work is, and everything to keep you motivated is something helpful. And Rayyan is quite nice in that. Except that it's, well, of course, it's very competitive, enthusiasmating. It's also quite nice that you can have the ability to give a reason for all exclusion reasons for an article, but you can also share it with your colleague. So you can see, okay, for me, the reason why to exclude this paper was because the outcome or the population were wrong. And it also shows you very nicely if there are conflicts, and then you can discuss internally why you thought it should be excluded or included, and then you come to consensus. And I think this tool really helped us in the end to be much more effective compared by doing it all in another resource. But okay, so we started up with around 5,000 titles, and then in the end, we got 30 articles. So we ended up with a full text of 35, and then we could exclude 10 of them after reviewing them in detail. And then we also looked into the reference list of all the full text included, and then we could actually include another 5 extra articles. So we ended up with 30 of them. So 30 studies, and they discussed 21 instruments, which actually shows you that many of them were actually one instrument, one study. The rheumatic diseases which were researched were mostly RA and OA, but also juvenile idiopathic arthritis, lupus, also one on temporomandibular disorder, chronic pain, PSA, and low back pain. Well, unfortunately for you, if you try to summarize the COSMIN psychometric properties into one table, you get these very long, very, well, I would say challenging tables, which are difficult to explain in detail for all of the instruments. But I will try to help you and guide you, and I believe that together we can get through this. And the best, for me, the most easy way to guide you through this is actually to take two examples, and we'll start with the AIMS, which is the Arthritis Impact Measurement Scale. And this was actually validated in 6 studies in rheumatic diseases. So as you can see from the instrument, there are different versions. You got like the AIMS, a second version of the AIMS where a little bit of the questions were restructured. And we also have one study discussing the short form of the AIMS, which is just a shortened version of it. It was validated in different diseases, which actually makes it a very good general instrument. And then we looked at the psychometric properties of the social support subscale, because the AIMS is a very big scale. It has different properties, and one of them is social support. And what you can see here is that it were mostly structural validity, internal consistency, and hypothesis testings, which were actually validated quite well for the AIMS. And some of the studies all brought little parts of different kinds of validity properties also together, which in the end will probably give us a good idea how valid the AIMS in reality is. Aside of the AIMS, we also have another instrument which is really well validated, which is the OQOL. And this is an instrument developed for osteoarthritis knee and hip, and it measures the quality of life. So a bit like the AIMS, this instrument is measuring more than only social support. It's measuring a whole list of different subscales, and one of them is indeed social support. As you can see from the instrument tab again, there are different versions of the OQOL. You have mostly the instrument itself, but also a briefen version, the mini OQOL, and also a version which is put online, the e-OQOL. It's validated always in an osteoarthritis population. So in that sense, it's probably well suited for this population, but the validity of it in other populations needs to be researched further. Here you can see that the development and the content validity is a bit researched, but again, social validity, internal consistency, reliability, and also hypothesis testing were mostly researched. And again, some of the studies gave a little bit of extra information, but not that much. Now, these were two examples. And if we look at more in a general way, what you can see is that in total, it are mostly structural validity. So this is actually like what is the questionnaire really measuring, which kinds of scales it is measuring? Do we see these latent factors coming again if we try to validate them? Is actually the questionnaire making sense, which is the internal consistency, and also the hypothesis testing. For example, do you expect, for example, social support to be less in this kind of population or not? And these are the three psychometric properties which are most prevalently researched. Then criterion validity and measurement error and responsiveness are actually the ones who are not really that much validated in research. I guess this is because, for example, for criterion validity, there is not clearly a gold standard for it. So people are not really trying to compare it too much with other instruments because they're not sure what the other instrument is also really measuring. And perhaps the other constructs are also more difficult to measure. Also quite interesting is that like the development and the content validity, so actually the process in which you actually try to ask stakeholders what they think about the issue of social support, for example, and how much the questionnaire reflects these issues, are not really that much studied for these instruments. It can be because the instrument is actually developed in another population than any rheumatic disease, and then actually just used in rheumatic diseases. But also because it's probably a very lengthy and challenging task to do. And I guess that's the reason why we see that actually these two are not that much done, and actually that if you look at the quality behind them, that we find much issues when trying to check this validity with the COSMIN checklist. So these were a bit of tables. So I guess I'll stop showing you all the tables and try to show you more like the general ideas behind them. So for the discussion, I think this systematic review is quite important because it gives you a summary of the validity of all the social support instruments in rheumatic diseases. And we can say that for some of the domains of validity, that many instruments actually have shown sufficient evidence, for example, structural validity and internal consistency and reliability. But there are properties such as criterion validity and measurement error, invariance, and responsiveness that actually remain largely unknown and that we should be quite aware of when using these instruments. And I think that's also why it's difficult to make a clear decision and say this one is the best, because these properties needs to be actually researched before any optimal choice can be made between social support instruments. In retrospect, when thinking about this, I think also that's important that social support is put more into the research agenda these days, because, for example, now in a global crisis like which is the COVID-19 pandemic, things like a social network are actually disappearing for many of our patients. And that's, of course, something to be aware of. And it would be good to also keep this in mind when looking at the quality of life of many of these patients nowadays, especially in the last year. Of course, like everything, our research has its limitations. So we only looked into rheumatic diseases, but of course, other social support instruments exist and developed in other diseases, but perhaps these are also generic for us. So perhaps we also need to look further than only in our research field. And then this is something which, the second limitation is something which me and Diego really struggled with, because you have the social support constructs, which is, of course, it seems clear, but you have many questionnaires that describe a bit of things which resemble social support. So, for example, social functionality and activity, and this would have made our search much larger. And Diego and me decided that we really focus on the social support and exclude everything which resembled a bit more like social activity or functionality, like, I don't know, going to friends or being able to go to friends, which is something different for us than social support. But this is, of course, to be discussed. And also something which we noticed was that the instruments we found, they were not really measuring like the whole social support dimension. They were actually quite heterogeneous. Some really focused on very intimate relationships, like, for example, wife and husband, while others were much more broad and try to describe in general an idea of the total social network. And I think that's actually also a really important issue to keep in mind when choosing your instrument which you would like to use for social support, because it also completely depends on what your goal is. Do you want to, for example, only think about what the effect is of the spouse on an RA patient? Then probably you go for a much more focused instrument compared to if you only want to have like a global idea of social support to, for example, to use it as a mediator in one of your analyses. Of course, unfortunately for me and Diego, we didn't hear any fat lady singing, which means that our work is not finished yet. So what are we planning yet? So I discussed actually what has been measured, so which property has been measured, but I didn't give you all the numbers behind all of the little ticks on the tables. And that's also something me and Diego need to finish, is that actually we need to find for every study the exact value and actually see if, for example, a Chrombex alpha, if it's actually really good or not really good. And then also we want to compare in detail all the different properties of different instruments. We have already made a very basic approach to this, but we have, for example, want to see how many questions are it, how long does it take to fill it in, because it are also these very pragmatic choices that actually will help you in choosing the correct, the optimal social support instrument for your research. And now you see a fat lady singing. So this is the end. I want to thank you all for listening to me and Diego. And if you have any questions, please shoot. Shall I stop sharing the fat lady?
No, please leave it there.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was very, very interesting. We have one of the questions you already answered, more or less, because it was which one would you recommend? But we have one question here from este. So what, would you include social support in future EULAR recommendations as another treatment?
Oh, that's a difficult one, because I don't know if you can really consider this as a treatment. I think it's something you really have to take into account when trying to see why for a patient or for a group of patients some treatments are failing. I think it can help you a lot in that, but how to tackle it, that's probably also a completely different research. But I wouldn't call it treatment. I would call it just helping people in the end.
Yeah, that's what we are there for, right? So we actually, at EULAR, we have the self-management recommendations, which actually, one of the first things they say is go for social support, first thing. And then ask the professionals, please know exactly where you can get social support for your patients and do your own support. Any other questions from the group?
Loreto, can I also give an idea about that? Yes. For another research, we were actually looking into peer mentoring, because many patients expressed the desire to try to talk to other patients about their disease and about their daily issues which they are confronted with. I think this peer mentoring is also an important opportunity for actually to improve the social support, because patients do trust other patients more because they are interconnected with their own disease, of course. And I think that's also something which, EULAR and everyone else can also take into account.
Yeah, that's why one of the main recommendations is actually join forces with patients associations, because they can find you the right peer to help you, that is closer to you in age and culturally and all that. But it's true, you are completely right. You trust somebody that is more like you and has the same problems. Yeah. So I'm going to close the streaming, and I want to thank you very, very much. Your seminar, your workshop here, I think it really enlightened.